Shadows, one of the more underappreciated parts of video game graphics. Now, when it comes to graphics, everyone has their specific priority to determine whether they think a game's graphics are good. Textures are usually the most common example to most people. Me, I'm a shading guy.
Back in the 7th generation of consoles, shadows became more clearer, but something wasn't quite right. Most of the time it was only one colour of shade and never went further with its detail.
Allow me to demonstrate further what I mean. I'm indoors. I'm in a shaded area. If I put my hand against the wall like this, it produces some extra darkness. This is what I mean by going further with detail.
Let's take a game that desperately needed more shading detail. Modern Warfare 3. Downturn. Every character, every object is stuck to one type of shade. Realistically, there would be additional shading when entities are close to each other. However, on PC, it's done to a very small extent.
On consoles, some games here and there tried to implement it. I have to remind you, I'm talking about 7th generation.
This is Just Cause 2 from 2010. You can see extra shading detail underneath the feet, not only for walking but also for grappling walls as well. But other body parts like the torso and head don't cast any extra shading. Yes, one can argue that Metal Gear Solid 2 did the same thing all the way back in 2001, but for this video, I won't go that far back in terms of console generation. The first big visual game I ever saw do this was Battlefield 3. Keep in mind, the gameplay shown here is on Xbox 360. This is where we begin.
I'm going to talk about 3 extra shading methods I've noticed in gaming at this point. These are what I call proper, outline, and pre-rendered. Let's get pre-rendered out of the way. Now, I know what you're thinking. Who the hell's pre-rendering? Certainly there's not a lot of examples, and you're right, it's mainly a 7th generation thing.
Biggest example is Mirror's Edge. To describe pre-rendering, the shading is already rendered onto backgrounds before lighting in-game takes place. Because you're dealing with static objects that don't move, it just seems right to do it. It's one of the biggest reasons why people say that this game has aged well visually. It's only obvious when you look down and see your actual shadow in an already shaded area. Black Ops 2 does this as well, but it's really subtle and isn't done completely. You'll see this on character models in certain static environments, but the rest of Black Ops 2 doesn't implement anything.
Next, let's talk about the outline method. You will not believe the number of games that use the outline method in the 7th and 8th generation of consoles.
The first game I realised this method existed on was Far Cry 3. In an already shaded area, extra shading will always appear behind entities, like an outline. But there is one major flaw of this method. The shading only sticks to entities and doesn't affect the environment, which it should. If you were to move the camera to an angle where you can see the gap between the environment and entity, you realise that the shading detail that is supposed to be here doesn't actually exist, because it's always staying behind the entity, like an outline. Metal Gear Solid 5 does this, and surprisingly, not particularly well. At close range it's barely noticeable to non-existent. At long range it's too much of a big blur. It's a shame because everything else in this game looks great. But I've seen the outline method done so many times to the point where I nitpick. I'm sure you've seen plenty of those GTA 5 Mega Super Ultra Max Settings RTX Ray Tracing Big Titty graphics mods. Yes, a lot of them are laughed at for shiny, slippery when wet environments. But sometimes the outline method that's already present in the game is exposed to such a terrible extent thanks to mods. This is the wrap-up mission. It's not an outline shade, but behind people's legs, there's a slight decrease in brightness or a colour change of some sort if you can see that. It moves with them like an outline shade. But my question is, why does this exist? We're in the middle of the sunshine. The actual outline shading shows no sense of depth. In this shot, Michael is in front of Dave. Michael's visible basic shadow is down here, that's his arm. But Michael's model provides extra shade behind him onto Dave, so an outline shade is taking place. But the problem is, Michael is actually a good meter away from Dave. Extra shading shouldn't take place at this distance. Not surprisingly, even that GTA Definitive Trilogy is guilty of the same thing. We're underneath a porch light, but look closely. Wouldn't an actual shadow be appropriate here? Some porch lights work accordingly, as you can see by this shadow, but some don't. Not only that, but if you can see the outline from a low angle shot while the porch light is above the characters, How does that make sense? Here's an example I was shocked by. You see, when I first played Battlefield 3, I thought it was properly done, but I came back to it and realised, no, it's outlined. But how did this fool me and not Far Cry 3, which only came out a year later? I think it's all down to depth, taking the distance between objects very close into account. Far Cry 3 does not take depth into consideration that much. It hardly matters how far a character is from an object or even if they're in a lit area. An outline appears, sometimes across the whole body. But when it comes to Battlefield, a lot of attention to detail was taken. The feet are shaded, obviously, no brainer. It's only when an NPC is behind cover you can see it. But it's strange, perhaps hard to describe, but I'll try anyway. Some or half of the outline isn't shown when it's not needed. We know at this angle extra shading shouldn't be used on the right hand side, because at this angle not all of the wall is directly behind the NPC. If I'm still not making sense, let's do a top-down diagram. The camera is here, the wall is here, the NPC is here. When we're looking this way, the wall on the right side of the NPC is far away, so outlining here wouldn't make much sense, but it does here, because it's closer. Because the outline is more aware of the distance between objects on sides of NPCs, it's a prime example of why depth is important here. The fact that this fooled me says a lot about the game's visuals. Again, I must iterate. 360 hardware.
Admittedly, I have to do the outline method as well, because while I am a 3D object, the video layer I'm stuck in is a 2D video, but at least I tried to hide it. For this demonstration, I'm going to make the outline shade red so you can see better. At this angle, the extra shade is to my left, your right. I'm trying to make the illusion that the extra shade is being casted onto the wall. Casting onto the wall is very important for later. It can't literally be behind me because that's an outline. So the outline shade is pushed a little bit this way, but not too far, obviously. If I move my forearm away from the wall, no shading should be casted from there anymore, because remember, we need to show depth. It should now go as far back as my elbow, because that's still close to the wall. If I move my forearm back, then it should extend right back to my fingertips. When I walk away from the wall, the shading should disappear from this distance. Now, let's change the shade back to black, and let's try this again. So my arm is out, my forearm in, and then my forearm out. Then I walk forward, and I walk back. This is probably the best demonstration I can give you. Now, what are proper examples? There are some, but not many.
Let's head to Infinite Warfare. Observe the dead body. I go prone to see underneath. By doing so, I can see the gap between the body and the floor and see if the extra shading is still there. But look, the shading is stuck to the floor and doesn't stay behind the body like an outline. It's not perfect by any means. It covers every individual limb and main body parts, but doesn't cover joints. But still, this is a good attempt at implementing proper shading detail. Full disclaimer, this was not the first COD to implement a shading system. I know I showed Modern Warfare 3, but that was for PC only. It was actually until Ghosts came along when an actual shading system came into place. Which is funny because everyone likes to talk trash about Ghosts. Let me show again when extra shading is implemented. This is Ghosts on 360. Nothing there. Here it is on Xbox One. It looks 100 times better. Quantum Break is a funny example. I believe it does both. I put a character up against a wall and the extra shading does stick to the wall there. But I think from the feet to lower legs, the outline system is sort of there. But hey, better to have both than just the outline.
Of course, I understand there are reasons for implementing outlines. I'm sure it's easier and less intense on the hardware. I mean, outlining me would have been easier, but no, that's too easy. I can see through that. It's all about the details and graphics which really make visuals stand out. And games like Infinite Warfare and Quantum Break prove that you don't need the latest high-tech game engine or RTX ray tracing to implement proper shading. In fact, at this point now of the next generation of consoles, games are fooling me again with their style of shading.
Riders Republic is a good example. On Xbox One, it's blatantly obvious. Outlines all the way. Next gen, however, is different. It's not that obvious. Admittedly, I'm looking at someone else's footage. It's as if now depth is taken into consideration again. Not every part of the body has to be outlined.
I think I've covered everything. Hopefully as clearly as I can. If you want to find out whether a game you own does proper or outline shading, follow these instructions. Firstly, take a character that's placed by a wall. Extra shading should take place. Next, move around to the side of the character. If the extra shading is stuck to the wall, it's proper. If the extra shading is stuck behind the character, it's outlined. You might be surprised like I did with Battlefield 3, but I am curious how many games implement proper shading. Anyway, with that being said, I'm out of here. Oh, actually, no, I'm not out of here. Don't ask why. Let's just say the YouTube copyright system is going to get very, very harsh.
We'll be right back.